Hi, everyone. This is Jason Bracco of Wall Street from Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street from Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a returning guest. You guys know him well. He was on here just a couple months ago to give us an update on the Clinton Foundation, the scandal going on there. He worked on Wall Street for decades as a value investor, a very successful investor, and now he's a whistleblower going in depth into the financial crimes that the Clinton family is committing. Charles Ortel, thank you for joining me again.
Well, thanks for having me on, Jason. I really appreciate it.
Now, Charles, you wanted to come back and give our listeners an update on the Clinton Foundation story and the things that are going on. You sent me an article today. We have a lot to discuss in this interview, but what's so special about what's going on right now? The article you sent me from Zero Hedge is talking about an FBI mutiny?
Yeah, so after James Comey came forward and said that he had recommended to Loretta Lynch, following Bill Clinton's meeting with Loretta Lynch in the airplane tarmac or wherever it was in, I think, Arizona, that the Department of Justice not proceed with further inquiries into the investigation of the server. The Clinton campaign and others close to the Clintons have been trying to spin the idea that there's nothing more. There's no investigation going on. Now, Richard Pollack is a veteran investigator. He's a really cool guy. I've come to know him over the last several months. He is, sorry, Richard, for this one. I'll blow his age. He's turning 65 next month. He was at one point the Washington, D.C. based producer for Good Morning America, the TV show, and then he was the first, I think he was an important producer for Fox News Sunday. He then basically said, you know, what I like about journalism is reporting. So he's taken it upon himself. It's a labor of love to be an investigative reporter. And he rooted around and with his context has confirmed that what's going on in an unprecedented move, according to his context, is that U.S. attorneys, and they're U.S. attorneys, I believe there are 93 of them, there were 93 of them at one point, scattered around, obviously, the United States of America. These are the people who go into the courtroom daily and prosecute cases on behalf of the federal government. That they, in concert, numerous U.S. attorneys, not just in one office, but there's a very prominent one called Preet Bharara here in New York, who has taken on Republicans and Democrats alike. He's currently going after Bill de Blasio, our mayor here in the city. He's going after Cuomo. He's going after the Scalos family, I think, are Republicans. And he's just, you know, you're a law and order, anti-corruption guy, quite a refreshing guy, frankly. He's a Democrat, an Indian American with political ambition. So he's one of them. It's rumored that there are other U.S. attorneys who said, you know what, Main justice is too political. The evidence here is overwhelming of corruption. It is not simply a local crime in Arkansas or even in New York. That that there's cross-border crimes, there's interstate crimes, there's wire fraud, bank fraud, mail fraud, solicitation fraud, all kinds of problems. And these U.S. attorneys, in league with the field offices of the FBI, according to Richard Pollack's report, have long been after the Clinton Foundation for what I can see in the public domain. And that is, in quotes, that the Clinton Foundation, and unfortunately foundations that are not controlled properly by trustees or audited, as is the case of the Clinton Foundation and its entities, charities are, in quotes, perfect vehicles for fraud. Because you can assert that you're doing good works around the world, and if nobody's checking, and if Lois Lerner's sitting there in the IRS and friends are in the Department of Justice, no one will go up against the former president and the aspiring president of the United States. And if you know that, then you can go around the world and you can have parties around the world and you can solicit money around the world. You can park it in offshore tax havens, and no one will really know what will happen to it. So you can use it for political campaigns in the U.S. and in other countries. You can use it for personal gain. You can invest it in friends' ventures. You can hire people who you would have to put on your political campaign otherwise. Now, I'm not asserting knowledge of any of those, but what I can assert knowledge as in somebody long around the financial arena, that the Clinton Foundation has never lawfully procured a legally compliant audit. And that's, there are strict rules on charities. Actually, Sarbanes-Oxley, that came in after, I think, in 2002, after Enron, those rules about certifying disclosures apply to charities as well. You have to make full, complete, comprehensive, truthful disclosures of your financial position, of conflicts of interest. You have to prepare your financial statements consistently according to generally accepted accounting standards. And these for foundations are very specific, and the Clintons have never done that. And so this thing is, Sarah Palin wrote the book Going Rogue. With this charity, the Clinton family has been going rogue really since the first day it operated on October 23rd, 1997. That's the first day they claim it was operating. I have my suspicions that it may have been operating before then.
Charles, to add to your points there, Rudy Giuliani, who is a longtime attorney, mayor of New York City, during 9/11, good track record as a prosecutor as well. He says there's enough evidence for racketeering charges for the Clinton Foundation. Are you familiar, though, with Corrine Brown what happened to her and what's been going on with her?
I'm very familiar with her. I've been one of her advocates, actually, on the radio several times. Yeah, Corrine Brown is, the standard approach, and this is a very good comparison that you bring up. The standard approach is to say, with regard to nationally prominent politicians in the middle of a campaign, that it would be, it would subvert the political process, subvert the election to launch a prosecution. Well, several weeks ago, an indictment was unsealed against this sitting African-American congressperson who's been in Congress, I believe, since 1993. She represents a district in Florida that is being carved up, so she's in a special election this year. Again, she's African-American, and she's roughly the same age as Hillary. She's 69 years old. So, but the difference, apparently, she's a superdelegate for Hillary. She's a loyal Democrat, and the indictment that has been unsealed, and I read it, basically centers on a slush fund of around $800,000 that's been operating, according to the prosecutors in the indictment, for several years, maybe 4 years. And it tags her and her chief of staff, I believe, or a staff member, for opening fake accounts, for taking money out of fake accounts, for using money contributed to the foundation for personal uses and political uses. This is $800,000, and the sentencing guidelines for her crimes would put her in prison for 350 years, which I suppose is good news if you can find a way to keep her alive for 350 years. But that's for $800,000 over about 4 years in one state in Florida. In the Clinton Foundation, they have declared contributions of $2 billion. It has been operating since October 23, 1997. It is in every major state. It's in Washington, D.C. It is, depending on how you look at it, soliciting and operating in almost 100 countries around the world. Corrine Brown is a legislator. Bill Clinton is a former Rhodes Scholar, graduate of Yale Law School, Attorney General, highest legal official of the state of Arkansas, governor of the state of Arkansas, highest legal official in the state of in America. He has no excuses. He taught law. He cannot say he didn't know about this. I mean, maybe if he were some country bumpkin who fell off a turnip truck, he could try that approach. And then meanwhile, you have Hillary Clinton, who, the campaign loves to cite the fact that she's been on all these lists as the smartest lawyer in the world or one of the smartest lawyers in America, and she's supposed to be so able, and Barack Obama says that she's, the most qualified person ever to run for president of the United States. She has no defense. And the interesting thing about foundations, I got into this February of 2015 because, I don't have much to do, and when I heard that, people were having difficulty figuring this thing out, it intrigued me, because on surface level, the notion that a former president like Bill Clinton, who really had a rough fight with the Bush family, would team up with former President H.W. Bush and then with W. Bush on all these things around the world, that intrigued me. That said, well, maybe the guy's grown up. He's been through the attempted conviction of his impeachment trial. Maybe he's grown. And I was prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt. But then when I looked at the paperwork, I said, oh, my God. I'll tell you a story of what this is. Bill Clinton wrote a book called Giving, or at least it's under his signature, in September of 2007. The reports in the press suggest that he made $6.4 million writing a book about charity. Now, we can park that issue. That's actually against the law. You're not supposed to operate a charity for personal gain, and that would obviously be a material gain. So, you ask yourself, how do you actually do this? In it, he recounts the tale of one of the genesis of his foundation was his experience in Arkansas. There's something called the town of Gillette in Arkansas, raccoon dinner. And there, Gillette apparently is a small town, I think, in southeastern rice country in Arkansas, according to Bill. And it doesn't have enough people in the town to fund a football team. So what they do once a year is they have a big barbecue where they serve raccoon, which I would guess is roadkill. And Bill jokes about it in this thing. They cover it up with hot sauce because that's the only way you can eat it. And they raise a lot of money because thousands of people come into the town, especially any Arkansas aspirants for high office in the state. And so year after year, this small town raises a lot of money. And, you look at that and you say, now, wait a minute. Why does a small town need to raise money for its football team every year? I mean, you would think you get that. I mean, how much does a football cost, right? I mean, it's not that expensive to go, to operate a football in a public football team in a public high school in a climate where it's pretty warm. So that's, I think, in the early days where Bill and then when Hillary learned the idea that when you get together and you that a charity can be used as a fundraising vehicle, and this is ordinarily why the IRS makes a big deal about it, because first of all, charity. One of the things I've discovered in my little work on this is that the charity world actually leans to the left, and it's a gigantic slice of the American economy. Some say it's a seventh of the U.S. economy, and that's big. That's bigger than most countries, most big countries. And people in the charities that operate, many of these are the religious institutions, but these charitable organizations, they do enormous good for the most part. They really do. And yes, people are quick to knock America as not being an exceptional place. It really is. That a seventh of this gigantic economy would dedicate itself. Ordinary people would not take a salary or wages in many cases and would pitch their time in. And it's the time and attention that is the caring time and attention where no profit is involved is so important to helping to lift people up who encounter adversity. It's really a wonderful thing. So the notion that these rubes, these brigands, would assert that what they're doing is actually charity, when in fact, when they were in the White House, they were under relentless investigations. Hillary would argue it's those evil right-wing Republicans, and I would counter-argue and say, no, it's your behavior. I mean, nobody asked you to turn $1,000 into $100,000 trading cattle futures while you're giving birth to Chelsea. Nobody asked you to do that. You did that. And we've never gotten a straight story over those and many other issues. So in 1999, after they got off, he wasn't convicted because I would argue, the Senate did not do its job. The Democratic senators did not look at the evidence, in particular the evidence involving Bill's assault on Juanita Broderick, which really should be looked at carefully, even today. They were in deep trouble financially. And then as Bill left, he had to surrender his law license. So he didn't really have an ability to do what former presidents can do who are lawyers, and that is they can be rainmakers at these blue-chip law firms. He couldn't do that, so he had to pay off this debt. And John Podesta, who is now chairman of Hillary's campaign, I think, if not co-chairman, was involved intimately in the whole plan to set up the Clinton Foundation, which was, as I said, formed October 23rd, 1997, just as the Lewinsky mess and the Paula Jones mess was beginning to come public. That thing was formed. It raised a small amount of money in 98, 99, and 2000, and then it started mushrooming after 2002. And so Podesta was involved in the waning years of the Clinton administration. Podesta is very much involved in charities. Podesta is very much involved in political campaigning, and he should know better. Now, I'm not just dumping on Democrats. Republicans also have been accused of abusing the charity laws. You're not supposed to use a charity for partisan political gain. That is, you're not supposed to create a charity and make it into a vehicle where people who want to support a political candidate directly or indirectly can gain a tax deduction for doing so. You're not allowed to do that. Whether you're Republican, Democrat, Green Party, Communist Party, whatever it is, you're not allowed to do that. And shame on those in both parties, any parties who are doing that. You shouldn't be doing that. And when the IRS normally rounds on a charity it suspects of wrongdoing, the burden of proof shifts, and it's up to the charity to prove to the IRS ordinarily that its behavior complies with the law. Now, Bill and Hillary were clever. They were able to insert, somebody was able to insert Lois Lerner into the IRS by June, July of 2001. And she was in there all the way through May 2013. So she was able to staunch any potential investigation here into the Clinton Foundation. And Democrat loyalists around the country have been able to do this. But now, to go back to your opening question, what's going on is this is a global fraud. And it's a fraud in many, many states. And the federal government doesn't have primary authority over investigating this fraud. Individual states can do it, and in any foreign country where they solicited it illegally, those foreign countries can do it. And there are many foreign governments that have been duped here. Their taxpayers have been duped into supporting this fraudulent enterprise.
Yeah, Charles, to add to your point there, I just saw a story. Did you see the Australian government admitted that they gave the Clinton Foundation $100 million for AIDS vaccines to distribute, I think, in Africa and other poor countries? And they think the money was basically entirely misappropriated.
Yeah, I might be a little bit involved with that investigation. So, yeah, what I was able to do is I was able to go systematically through. Here's the rub. Last year, I warned publicly many times, including with you. I warned the Clinton Foundation on your podcast and on television and radio and in print and on my website that they better refile their tax forms by November 16th, 2015, and they better do it right. And the Clinton Foundation said, no, we don't need to refile. We don't need to refile. Then frankly, I'll call her flat out an idiot. Their lawyer allowed her name to be used, a DLA Piper, to say, we have done nothing wrong, and I advised my client we don't need to refile the forms, and in an abundance of caution, we are nonetheless refiling the forms. That is just flatly wrong. They still haven't fixed the forms. They have to go all the way back to the beginning. For the period October 23rd, 1997 to December 31st, 1997, there's no financial information of any kind for the Clinton Foundation, and there needs to be. It's implausible that no expenses were incurred setting up this foundation, no legal fees were paid for. It's just implausible. And then you go forward every year, their accounts are not audited. In fact, through December 31st, 2004, they flatly say in the audits that are they're omitted from the Clinton Foundation website but are available online in certain states, these things procured by the trustees of the Clinton Foundation state that the financial statements are not prepared in accordance, they basically don't say it this way, that they're illegal. They're prepared using techniques that are not allowed in the United States of America. Well, you can't do that. But that's what they did through 2004. And so their forms are all screwed up, and in particular, one thing that is still not fixed is that for no period from October 23rd, 1997 through December 31st, 2007, is there any disclosure, as is required by law, for the aggregate amount of government grants by governments made to the Clinton Foundation. There's no disclosure of that still in these forms. And under New York law from 2004 forward, you have to make detailed disclosure of those government grants, and they've not complied with with New York law, which is in part, I suspect, why Preet Bharara in New York is looking at this. So why is this important? If you go and you have trustees who are all enthralled to the Clintons, these are all political allies or otherwise dependent on the Clintons for one favor or another. So you don't have an independent board. You don't have anybody who can stand up to this. And you employ an accounting firm that's basically been tagged with fraud in multiple cases around the country and is highly suspicious and is not up to looking at an international operation. Of course the numbers are not going to work. And so if you've also got governments and government leaders at different periods of time, you probably have some who thought they were doing good works, and you have probably others who thought, they were getting along for a gravy train here. What Bill does with his foundation, maybe Tony Blair can do with his foundation, or Nicolas Sarkozy can do with something similar, or the former leader of Australia. So I began to check and gain information about which governments have declared that they've given information to the Clinton Foundation, and then I reached out to these governments. And so I have, for example, a detailed list from the government of Norway of how much money they believe they've sent to the Clinton Foundation. And that list is by grant, by recipient entity, by year, by amount. I don't have it by the date of transfer yet, but it does not reconcile with the Clinton Foundation forms, and it's a lot of money. It's like $90 million U.S., and the Clintons declare $30 million. In Australia, it's $100 million, and nobody really knows. They say about $25 million. With Unitaid, which is based in Switzerland, it's $650 million. And we don't really know. In the crucial period 2007-8, it appears that as much as $100 million might be diverted. With the Gates Foundation in 2009, they say they gave Clinton's 20, Clinton's report 15. And, it's not, people listening to this who don't know a lot about accounting would say, well, okay, so people make mistakes. That's not the way it works. With a foundation and with any corporation, accountants don't have that much time. They have a lot of time on their hands, and they write these memos. One is called consideration of fraud in financial statements. And when you have an entity that misreports its revenues, accountants normally say, oh, my God, this is likely a fraud, because if somebody can't keep track of their revenues, chances are they're not going to keep track of their costs. And so to have multiple mistakes, to not be able to get, the fact, to fail to disclose these government grants. And then when you go into the period 2002, 3, 4, 5, that's a period when, with regard to these HIV/AIDS drugs, this will be coming out in the coming weeks. The HIV/AIDS medicines that were distributed, under the care of the Clinton Foundation may have been adulterated. There's a high probability that they may have been adulterated. Why is that? Because they distributed, in theory, generic versions of these drugs. The FDA did not approve any foreign versions of generic HIV/AIDS drugs until January of 2005. And they did it by category. They did it by company. They did it by plant. They did it by tablet. They did it by composition, whether it's tablet or oral. And the Clintons have not yet revealed precisely what drugs were purchased with what money and when sent to what countries. But you can contrast. They definitely have given press conferences that they spent lots and lots of money prior to January 2005, according to press releases, and I'm talking over $100 million U.S. around the world, supposedly purchasing these drugs. Well, they couldn't have been FDA approved, and it's likely they weren't registered properly in the countries where they went. And there's no statute of limitations here. In my view, the Clintons, I think any fair-minded lawyer who looks at what's called the 1023, which is the application the Clinton Foundation submitted to the IRS, it must be truthful and complete. And if there are amendments, you've got to, in advance, ask for permission from the IRS, and any member of the public can get that file. When you look at that file, I find lots of false and materially misleading statements. And the trouble is that the IRS normally has the right to then revoke the authority of this thing to operate back to the date of the transgression. So the way I look at it, the most charitable approach is that after July 12, 2002, when they illegally began to claim that they were fighting HIV/AIDS around the world, the Foundation's tax-exempt status would be revoked back to then. If you want to get even tougher, you can start thinking, just how much was this foundation used in 97, 98, 99 for Hillary's campaign? And generally, in 2004, when they completed the facility in Little Rock, guess who was an independent trustee of the Clinton Foundation? Terry McAuliffe, chairman of the Democrat National Committee. Now, do we really believe that Terry McAuliffe spent no time using the mailing list of the Clinton Foundation to raise money for the Democratic Party for all of its tough contests around the world, around the country? Do we really believe that? That Vernon Jordan's wife and Terry McAuliffe and David Pryor, all people, deeply stuck into the Clinton machine, would have operated this thing pristinely in a compliance with state, federal, and foreign laws, knowing their backgrounds. Do we really believe that? Because if we do, I've got a bridge I can sell you here in Brooklyn.
Well, Charles, Julian Assange of WikiLeaks has hinted that there's a lot more Clinton Foundation emails coming before the November election, so I'm curious to see what's in those.
Well, I can tell you, as somebody who's been on the board of foundations, I would suspect I know exactly what it is. I don't know precisely which emails, but when you operate a foundation and you're dealing with donors that care about complying with the law, those donors understand that the forms you file with regulators are dated. By definition, they're dated. So the most recent form for the Clinton Foundation federally was dated November 16th, 2015. A lot of time has passed since then. So thoughtful donors like the Gates Foundation and others will say, all right, you want my money, I need an undertaking, an enforceable undertaking from officers of the foundation certifying to me that since the date of your federal filings and all state and foreign filings, that you have operated in compliance with the law. And there'll be back and forth in the drafting of those representation letters. Donors will say, if you don't want to send it to me, then you can forget about my money. And for a foundation of this size, with this many serious people donating, like the Rockefeller Foundation, the Gates Foundation, Elton John is very active in fighting HIV/AIDS and has 2 foundations. There are quite a few foundations that are run professionally. The notion that there would be no emails on this topic, the notion that in 2008, when the first evidence we have is prepared by Judicial Watch, November 16, 2008. It appears Valerie Jarrett sends a communication signing a memorandum of understanding with the Clinton Foundation on behalf of the Presidential Transition Committee. That's the first moment that it would appear that the team Obama is negotiating to have Hillary be Secretary of State. Well, at that moment in time, if you look through the New York State filings, you'll find, as I found, that the Clinton Foundation was basically hemorrhaging cash. It was in a disastrous state. It had diverted money from donors. It had been ejected from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, its principal HIV/AIDS thing, on March 31st, 2008. It had its authority involuntarily revoked, which is a very serious problem for a foundation. When that happens to you in a state, you have to disclose it in most other states and legal jurisdictions, and of course they didn't do that. So they were in desperate shape, but they represented to the Obama administration, as you can see in public domain, that things were going swimmingly. The memorandum of understanding makes it sound like the Clinton Foundation was vying for a Nobel Peace Prize, but instead that prize went to Barack Obama in 2009. So when Team Obama took control after January 20th, 2009, don't tell me that nobody from Team Obama approached the IRS, went into the IRS and said, okay, what's the real story with the Clinton Foundation? And don't tell me that nobody found out how disastrous its filings were. And don't tell me there are no emails back and forth all around the ballpark, that led to the ultimate restructuring, a clumsy attempt to restructure the Clinton Foundation by creating 3 new entities. Clinton Health Access Initiative, Inc. was created on September, I believe it is 29th, 2009. Clinton Global Initiative, Inc. was created in September 4th, 2009. An Alliance for a Healthier Generation, Inc. was created, I believe, in February of 2002, 10 rather, and the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund was created in January of 2010. Don't tell me that there are not emails flying around between Valerie Jarrett and Lois Lerner and the IRS and state and foreign tax authorities say, what the heck is going on? Why are you doing this? Because there have to be. And don't tell me that nobody already has them, because I believe the FBI may have them. I believe other agencies may already have these emails. So, the approach the Clintons have taken on this is on its face implausible. Anybody who understands charities will know it's not what they've shown us that's important. It's what they've failed to show us. And that's where they get in even bigger trouble. People say, well, this server, it's no big deal. Baloney. The Clinton family and their suite of advisors stole our property, the taxpayers' property. They took all of these government communications, and instead of keeping them safe inside, secure locations inside government property, they kept all these sensitive communications in 2 homes that we know of, and who knows where else they may have been. These homes are visited by people. Who knows who actually may have seen printouts of these emails or computer screens inside these Clinton homes? Nobody knows. And they kept this property for months, many months, years after Hillary Clinton left in the State Department. And they only gave it back because they were caught, like any thief. So they tried the common thief's argument. Well, I gave it back. Since I gave it back, it was never stolen. That is baloney. They stole our property. They failed to keep it secure. And only gullible people would settle at this point for, the argument, well, no harm done, especially now, and Richard Pollack's other piece that got, the thoughtful investigative journalists so excited, is that, Hillary having said multiple occasions, I've turned over all the emails. Well, earlier this week, thanks to the great Judicial Watch, we discovered there are more emails, and there are more coming, and more coming, and more coming. And you don't get to say, under penalties of perjury, I gave you everything, and then a month later say, whoops, here's something I didn't give you. And, whoops, here's another thing I didn't give you. You just don't get to do that.
Well, Charles, Hillary and Bill are pathological liars, and the mainstream media and the Department of Justice protect them. They rarely ever get called out on it. But you brought up an interesting point about the American people; they wouldn't stand for it. I can make an argument of the exact opposite. I would say that there's millions of brainwashed Americans, especially American women. I've met women in the Justice Department who are female lawyers who worship Hillary Clinton. I actually, when I'm on dating websites, I live right outside of Washington, D.C., when it's listed that the woman is a lawyer and works at the Department of Justice, it almost always says in the profile how much they love Hillary Clinton. They hate anyone else who doesn't like Hillary Clinton. They have pictures with Hillary Clinton. So these are the type of people that are protecting her. I'll give you an example, too, of a lapdog in the mainstream media who's protecting Hillary Clinton, George Stephanopoulos, who I think was a big donator to the Clinton Foundation. He interviewed the creator of the Clinton Cash documentary, and he said he watched it, and there's no proof. He said there's no proof in the Clinton Cash documentary. What's your response to that?
I'd say that George Stephanopoulos has no credibility. I mean, let's ask George Stephanopoulos to come forward and show us the basis upon which he secured a mortgage for the expensive home that he had while he was working on a government salary for Bill Clinton. Show us how he did that. I'd love to know what lending firm gave him that mortgage and on what basis. George Stephanopoulos, in my view, on this topic has no credibility whatsoever, where in contrast, Peter Schweitzer and Steve Bannon, Steve being the executive chairman of Breitbart, they have fantastic credibility, and there's enormous proof. And the only thing I would say, and I know Peter, and I went to the opening of the movie, and I've told him to his face, the problem with what he's doing is that on quid pro quo, no criminal ever sits there and says, I better write a memo down explaining to people how I'm going to break the law. Of course there's no trail on trading influence that whatever Mr. Shiguri, that Lebanese Nigerian dude, wanted for pledging $1 billion to the Clinton Global Initiative. Of course there's not going to be a memo saying, if I pledge $1 billion, you'll give me this. So that's why I ignored the pay-for-play stuff. But on the other hand, on foundation filings, the laws are really strict. Those have to be true completely. They cannot omit a material fact or state a material fact in a misleading way, or they can't fail to be complete. And the issue with charity fraud, soliciting under false pretenses, you don't have to prove, as you would, let's say, in Enron and other private frauds involving for-profit agencies. You don't have to prove entities, rather. You don't have to prove intent, and you don't have to prove harm. All you have to prove, under, for example, New York state law, is that the filings were false and materially misleading, and that I can tell you is categorically the case. It remains the case as we're on this phone call, and that the Clinton entities have been soliciting, and that they admit. Open and shut case of New York State charity fraud. Open and shut. And the way you look at it, the lawyers tell me the way they look at it, it's not how much you collect, it's how much you solicit. So going back to Corrine Brown, she only collected $800,000. That's a lot of money, but her problem is how many letters went out under her signature or under the name of this foundation asking for money. Each request for money can be, depending on the state, a felony. Then, Lord help you if you use the mail, or you use the internet, or you use telephones. Then you start getting into federal crimes. So, George Stephanopoulos is absolutely wrong. And one of the reasons he doesn't want to admit that he's wrong is he's got a conflict of interest. The Clinton Global Initiative, the piece that he, I believe, gave money to, is a complete fraud. It's not a charity. It was never organized properly. It is closed off to the public, so by definition it cannot be a public charity. And it sets its entry, it's by invitation only to those meetings. You have to pay, I believe, $20,000 a year, which is obviously well beyond the level that any public person can afford, normal person can afford or would pay. And then you sit in a room, an expensive party for which they spend, $8-10 million a year. It's tough to spend $8 to $10 million on a 2 to 3 day event. And they sit around, they scratch they can pat each other on the back for what they claim they might do. They don't even make hard, firm pledges. And, for people who are involved with charity, you can only deduct a contribution, a cash or securities or, item of value has to leave your control to the charity, has to be properly vetted. and then you can deduct it. You can't deduct the pledge, and you certainly cannot deduct a commitment for action, which is what they call it. And others have written about the fact that less than a majority of the supposed commitments of action have actually been funded. There's no vetting of any of this. And I checked a comparable entity called Renaissance Weekend, which is a gathering down in Hilton, I think, area, South Carolina, where similar idea. It's by invitation only, and you do exactly this between Christmas and New Year's. You sit around, tell one another how great you are because of what you plan to maybe do in the future. And you have policy discussions and fancy meals and stuff like that. Is not organized as a charity. So this is not a charity, this Clinton Global Initiative, and unfortunately Stephanopoulos gave money to it, and he took it, probably claimed a tax deduction. So of course he doesn't want to open that up. And there are a lot of journalists on the right and the left who contributed to the Clinton Global Initiative. There's a list of them you can get. And, it's totally understandable that these people would look at the Clinton Global Initiative as a journalistic gold mine, right? Here you have a whole bunch of former heads of state gathered in one simple place to interview in New York. It's a great opportunity to score exclusive interviews, so you're going to go easy on them. And that explains Stephanopoulos. Shame on him. Shame on him.
Well, there's also not many unbiased journalists now doing objective journalism. There's so many political hacks, people that are slanted one way or another on their political views, and they do their reporting that way. But in terms of Corrine Brown, though, when I was learning about her and reading about her story, I was just shocked at the parallels to the Clinton Foundation based on our last interview, that you were telling me all the bad stuff that the Clinton Foundation had done, and seeing the discrepancy of what Corrine Brown was getting in terms of jail time and how little money she had stolen compared to the orders of magnitude that the Clinton Foundation had done. I've heard some people say that the Clinton Foundation is so big and there's so many billionaires in so many different countries, and there's so many top American political officials and top bureaucrats in government agencies, that it's basically too big to prosecute, and people are scared of the blowback if they actually do blow this thing apart of all the other names that Hillary would bring down with her. Do you think that's part of it?
You mean, are they too big to jail, in summary? I would say that the answer to that question is no. That, in fact, when you look at this objectively, and it's funny, one of the things I did not expect to have happen to me, though I live in the West Village here in Manhattan, which is hardly, conservative Republican bastion, I certainly did not expect to get the kind of support I have been getting from people, perfect strangers who tend to be progressive, left-wing people. I've got hundreds of people who have offered to help, and thousands actually, different aspects of this, publicizing it, and they care deeply about this. It's very important for the charitable world that when somebody like the Clintons, who should know better, go this badly wrong. This is a textbook case in global charity fraud. It needs to be exposed as such. People need to be prosecuted as such. And Barack Obama has a conflict of interest for several reasons. The first reason is that in 2010, Barack and Michelle Obama gave the Clinton Foundation, the Bush part of it, $200,000 plus. And they did it in a way and during a time when that Clinton-Bush Haiti fund was illegally formed and operated. So technically speaking, they have a tax liability, narrowly. That Clinton-Bush Haiti fund in 2010 received, according to the Clinton Foundation, $37.2 million or so from the Clinton Foundation. The problem is that in the tax filing for 2011 relating to 2010, the one filed in 2011 for 10, the destination of that 37 million or so has to be identified under the rules. Any donation above 5,000 leaving a charity has to be identified with particulars. And they listed the address as a post office box in Baltimore. Only there is no such address for the Clinton-Bush Haiti Fund in Baltimore. And that's precisely what Corrine Brown is being tagged for in a much smaller amount. And unfortunately, again, I don't feel bad about this at all because I warned the Clintons publicly. I said, listen, you better refile your tax forms, and you better do it thoroughly, and they didn't do it. So on November 16, 2015, when they refiled their 2010 form for the parent, they compounded the felony. They reiterated that they had sent their largest donation in 2010 from the parent, went to the Haiti Fund, and it went to a post office box, and, it can't possibly have happened. Moreover, they try to claim that the Clinton-Bush Haiti Fund had no bank accounts in Haiti. It's impossible to operate in Haiti without a bank account. So, there's basic stuff, basic blocking and tackling. And then, it'd be one thing if there were no, issues buzzing around Haiti. The Haitians are rioting in the streets from time to time over the fact that Bill Clinton and his colleague in another parallel thing, much bigger, called the Interim Haiti either Recovery or Relief Commission, is rumored to have taken $14 billion from around the world. But nobody knows what happened to it because Bill and his co-chairman refuse to divulge, refuse to allow outsiders to explain to the world what happened to $14 billion. Now, $14 billion is a lot of money in Haiti. The whole country in 2010, the national income was around $10 billion. So, that would be like flooding the U.S. with $20 trillion. You would think for that, now, we've been through the stimulus at $1 trillion, and we know what we got for that, which was bupkis. You would think that for the kind of money that went into Haiti, you get something. Instead, somehow Hillary Clinton's brother, one of them, who's had his own troubles going way back when, magically goes on the board of a company that gets a concession to exploit all the gold, remaining gold in Haiti. Now tell me what kind of a group gets together and takes a country of 10 million people that just can't catch a break, claims they love the Haitian people, claims they want to help the Haitians, allow $14 billion to go into it, steal its gold, refuse to account for the finances of it, and try to claim that you ought to be, because of your record, of the foundation, that you really deserve the right to occupy the White House because you're a woman, and that your husband, in his spare time as First Laddie, what he's going to do is he's going to energize the American economy in the same way he energized Haiti. I don't think so. So, I think here, I could tell you that it's taken a while. I've been at this for many months, and you're absolutely right. In the beginning, when it seemed like Hillary might win, people were very nervous about challenging the Clintons. But now the things have changed, and I think in Preet Bharara, we'll see. Maybe he's just going to, fold like a dirty shirt, but I don't think so. I mean, he's very aggressively involved against, Republicans and Democrats at high level. He put Rajat Gupta in prison and Raj Rajaratnam, and I'll tell you there's a link here between Rajat Gupta and the Clinton Foundation through the American India Foundation, in which they're both involved, which is a fraud, another fraud, and through the provision of these drugs supposedly fighting HIV/AIDS, I think came through links that McKinsey established for Ira Magaziner and Bill Clinton into India. And so, Preet Bharara has, he's a tough guy by reputation. He's got a strong team behind him. And, good will come out of this. As I mentioned, Barack Obama thinks he's going to be running a foundation. His own papers, the way my lawyers tell me that the foundation filings for the Barack Obama Foundation only got through because the IRS let them through. Normally, they would not get through because they're not specific enough. They give the board broad powers, and you're not allowed to give a foundation broad powers. They have to be specific, limited powers. And you can ask Cleta Mitchell, who represents the various Tea Party defendants, what happens when the IRS decides to enforce its rules. And particularly, I advise my friends, and I have friends on the left, to say, you really don't want to go down a track of saying that whoever wins the presidency gets the right to punish his or her enemies. Because, imagine what might happen if somebody on the right decided to do that, to go after people on the left. Imagine what might happen. You don't want that. You want even-handed administration of the law, and shame on the Barack Obama administration for what they did to the Tea Party people, it's alleged, in 2010 and afterwards. So, I actually think that as people think about it, if you talk to people who know anything about how public charities and foundations work, many of them are left-leaning, and you ask them, what will happen, what might happen to me? I run a foundation, and I decided I'm just going to radically alter my purposes without telling the IRS. Is that a good idea? And everyone I have asked that question before, people begin to associate me with this effort. When it was more anonymous, they all looked at me like I was, had 7 heads. You're not allowed to do that. You're just not allowed to do that. And, nobody is going to defend this. this is maybe an opportunity to unite the country. To have people on the right and the left come together and say, charities are great. American charities are great, and charity fraud is a bipartisan, is an area where people on the right, the left, and independents can all agree we need to stamp it out.
Charles, it seems that the country is being divided more. It seems, the elites like Hillary and Bill Clinton, they have a different set of rules than regular people like you and me. Even people who have money are up there with Hillary Clinton. They get away with so much extra. So it's just the way the country is now, that things are divided. People are angry. People are, a lot of people in the real economy are just not doing well financially. Donald Trump's telling more truth about the real economy than Hillary Clinton is. You have that Clinton Inc. You're going to be in the new documentary coming up called Clinton Inc., right?
I haven't heard the latest on it. Yeah, last I heard, though, it's supposed to open in September, but I don't know. I mean, I'm not really close to the marketing of it, so I don't know how that's going to work. But I did get myself filmed in it in like April, May of this year. It's a pleasure. The author, Daniel Halper, is a wonderful journalist, and the book itself is well worth reading. But yeah, I'm told there's some interesting people. I'll probably slow down the finished version, but there are some pretty famous people in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, the Clintons just lie so much, Charles. I don't know if you paid attention to Hillary's health problems, but I mean, whether it's the Clinton Foundation or Hillary lying about her health problems, there's not any honesty or transparency really from them coming out, whether it's them talking about Hillary Clinton talking about raising taxes on the middle class. In her Omaha speech, she said, I watched the video on Drudge Report, she says she's going to raise taxes on the middle class. Then a couple days later, I started seeing articles coming out saying that she plans a $1.3 trillion tax increase. Now she's giving excuses and lies, saying she was misquoted, that's incorrect, things like that. So what's your take on it? Do you think then that is she actually going to be charged by these lawyers in New York? I don't think there's enough time for them to. The government moves so slow, Charles. I don't think they're going to bring charges until after the election, and maybe the elites have already gotten her the presidency.
See, again, I don't know. I mean, on the presidency, I do have a worry, and on the election, I do share the worries echoed by Donald Trump and others that there's a chance the election could be stolen. I do worry about that because, what you see evidence of it in the Democratic primary. I actually went with my son and a friend to the Bernie Sanders rally here in Washington Square Park, and I was amazed at the energy of the people, and also the way it was not an unruly bunch of ruffians. I mean, it was a cross section, white, black, Asian, gay, straight, young, old, you name it. And then there was tremendous energy. We had to wait in the cold. It was quite cold actually, for like 3 hours to even for the thing to assemble. And long lines, nobody complained, no fights, no nothing. And anyway, there was a tremendous amount of energy and support, and I was there. I watched it for myself. With rallies that Trump has around the country, same thing. I think the people, and I suppose I could be accused of being one of these people, a pointy-headed intellectual type, have a tendency to look down their noses at the good men and women in this country who wake up every morning wondering how they're going to make it through the day, the week, the month, have no savings, concerned they're going to lose their job, concerned for their friends and their families, their fathers, their mothers, their kids, whatever. These people are not stupid, but members of the elite believe in that guy. Remember Gruber from the whole Obamacare thing? They believe you can Gruberize the American public, and I think in the signs in the Bernie rallies, and the signs in the size and magnetism, energy in those rallies, and in Trump's rallies, I think the elites are being proven wrong. I also think, the business model for campaigns is you hire consultants and they'd say, oh, we need to raise money because we got to buy television ads. And Trump figured out early on that that's not what motivates people. This generation, millennials, doesn't really watch, network TV and even cable TV. Social media is a lot more effective at galvanizing these crowds. And the social media, stuff coming back that I'm being told about has Trump winning in a landslide. So I think, I think the elites, you're right, are scared. I refer to the Democrat and Republican parties as the uniparty. I was certainly more of a Republican, but I left the Republican Party in the way I think, a long time ago. And I don't really see the utility of either party. I mean, it's not like in a connected world we really need these bureaucrats, armies of bureaucrats, to help us think. I mean, we have access, thanks to the internet and other means, to information that was basically shielded from the public. So people could think for themselves. People know, that when the various administration, Republican, Democrat, Obama, you name it, stand up on a pedestal and try to say that America is better off in 2016 than it was in 2007 and 8, we know that these politicians are smoking crack. I mean, there's no evidence of that. The jobs are disappearing. They're going from full-time to part-time. Healthcare costs are soaring. The only reason that asset values are high is that interest rates have been suppressed by central banks. We are the least dirty shirt in the international laundry. Other countries are in much worse shape. Everybody understands that when interest rates go up, when inflation starts to present itself, all financial assets, all physical assets will decline in price. Now, America has a chance to be the first big, major country to emerge from the coming mess, but not by lying to the people, which is what these politicians are doing. I mean, these invented unemployment numbers where you take all the workers out who would be unemployed of the calculation, and I can come up with 4.9% unemployment. Nobody buys that baloney. But we do understand the debt burden is massive. We see that. And, to say that we want the same person who reset our relations with Russia and tipped us towards China and gave us TPP and blew up the Middle East, that person, we want to let that person who won't tell us where she was on the night of September 11th, 2012, still won't tell us what she was doing, who blamed the Benghazi thing on a video when she was telling her daughter that it wasn't a video. That person, really? That's the best person you can put forward as a Democrat? Trump has his problems too, but I mean, come on. It's preposterous.
Well, she's an establishment candidate, Charles. She's easily controllable now by the elites. She's a big Wall Street candidate. Look how much money hedge funds are giving Hillary compared to Trump. Look how much money the Wall Street investment banks are giving Bill for giving speeches.
But you're making my point. In the case, if the average American, one great thing, I've mentioned this before on your show, and I'll mention it again. The Consumer Expenditure Survey is a fantastic document. It comes out twice a year in America. Data from 2004 forward is comparable and useful. And it divides the country many different ways. One, by all the households, the estimates of the number of households by income quintile. So the top 20, next 20, et cetera. And you can look at, wages, other income, and then taxes paid by household. It gives you a sense of how real people live. And every sector of the economy since 2007 is worse off than it was in 2014, is worse off than it was in 2007. Every single. The rich, the poor, the middle, everybody is worse off. And the government's data proves that. Then you look at the numbers, and the average across the top quintile, round numbers, of pre-tax income is $200,000. And here's Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton giving speeches. Bill's giving speeches for $500,000, $700,000. And these aren't, 4-day speeches. This is a 20-minute speech, a 30-minute speech. It's not like each speech is different, and they're getting 200 here and 500 there and 300 there. It's preposterous. It's a bribe. It's nothing more than a bribe. And Americans understand this, and I actually, on this one, I start by blaming one of my idols, Ronald Reagan. He should not have taken that multi-million-dollar payment from the Japanese after he left in January 89, for giving speeches in Japan. He should have not set that precedent. And we should not have a situation where every departing president and every president's wife gets a fat book contract, for writing drivel that nobody actually reads. You shouldn't be getting checks for 10 and 15 or whatever they get, $1 million for writing something that would be best used as a doorstop or to start a fire. That just should not be allowed, and yet we allow it. And I think average Americans get it. You're not a person of a person of the people. You don't relate to the people if you've been living in a bubble for 25 years or more. You don't have a driver's license. You're flying around in private. You're demanding. She tries to say, well, somebody offered me a speech. The smoking gun has the list of her demands. I want a Gulfstream 7 or better. I want, multiple presidential suites. I want, whatever it is, a kale smoothie waiting for me, and this type of bottled water, and so many people traveling with me. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's not like she's revealing, a new biblical document. I mean, it's just drivel, platitudes, bromides, and and she still won't even tell us what she told Goldman Sachs. I bet you that those speeches are incredibly incriminating.
Yep, and she treats her Secret Service agents really, really bad. There's a couple books out about that it's actually considered a very bad penalty or demotion if you're a Secret Service agent and you're assigned to her detail because of how poorly she treats people around her.
And that's horrible. I mean, you think about the Secret Service agents. They are basically paid to take a bullet should one head towards Hillary Clinton. And you ought to be thanking, every morning, each Secret Service agent who comes to work for you, you ought to be giving that person a thank you. I understand that George W. was loved. Among other reasons, he refused to travel. He was careful on how he traveled on vacations to make sure that the Secret Service agents could spend time with their own families. And that's thoughtful. That's the kind of, I have my problems with George W. and the Bush family, but, that's a very decent side of Bush. And to hear these reports out of Hillary and Uma, no less, why does Uma Abedin have the right to have attitude to any public servant? What gives her that right? And I'll tell you, she has no right whatsoever. No member of the Clinton retinue should be treating, public people on the public payroll like, servants. It's ridiculous.
Well, Charles, I think we've gone a little bit over the amount of time I suggested, but you gave our listeners a lot of things to think about. I think, if I could summarize everything you've said, I think there's a lot more bombshells that are going to be coming about the Clinton Foundation news, whether it's from Julian Assange or you or the IRS investigation or the other foreign tax agencies investigating them or individual states. So there's a lot of people looking into this. Hopefully one of them will do the right thing. They won't be blocked by the mainstream media or the Department of Justice or other of Hillary's friends in the media or in the government, and someone will actually do the right thing and bring charges and prosecute.
Well, Jason, you're very gracious to give me this extra time. Thanks for having me on. I wish you great luck with your venture, and feel free to, follow me on my website, www.charlesortel.com, and on Twitter, @CharlesOrtel. I try to answer, I can't answer everything, but I do try to answer briefly people who tweet out to me or private message me, and there's a lot on my site, and it will always be free. So, feel free to take a look at it.
And keep up the good fight, Charles. I mean, you're a really good guy for the work that you're doing. You're a brave guy considering the history of the Clintons and what they've done to whistleblowers.
Well, I would say this, people do bring that up, you have as well, and what I say is, the brave people are the people who are wearing police uniforms and firefighters' uniforms and military service uniforms. Those are the brave people. They risk their lives every day, and they do it for perfect strangers. So if they can go and do that, I can certainly try to do my part here. And I did, I have been careful to spread my notes out and explain this to many, many journalists around the world. So this is not something that is going to disappear if I disappear. This is well engaged. There are a lot of knowledgeable, experienced investigators on this, and it deserves to come out. It's a case study in global charity fraud. Let's teach people by this example how to do right.